how non-Indigenous Australians might appreciate their recent political challenges. A new book tells stories of secrets, lies, ideological conflict, and racial discrimination laws. The book offers a window into Aboriginal culture that many Australians perhaps don't understand. We're going to be talking about how Christians might appreciate issues around things like the Uluru Statement, voice, treaty and truth, or the still developing controversies around Black Lives Matter. More than that, we might discover today where the Christian church or the Christian voice has been in the midst of some of those epic political battles that have happened over recent decades. Barbara Miller's new book is called Secrets and Lies, The Shocking Truth of Recent Australian Aboriginal History, a memoir. Now, Barbara has been involved in Aboriginal politics and history firsthand for about 50 years. She is a psychologist, sociologist, historian and activist. Barbara's written 10 books and is part of an Aboriginal family. She brings an insider view to her writing. Barbara Miller, let me say a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. It's wonderful to join you and your program today.
Barbara, your new book, Secrets and Lies, this is based on your own personal insights because you've been right there in the picture when it comes to some of the politics around issues of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander politics over decades now. Just give us a little bit of an insight for listeners so they know who we're talking about today for your own history. Give us a little insight here, Barbara.
Yes, I've certainly been at the forefront of that. The book is also very well researched with press statements and parliamentary debates and things like that as well. But I first came to Cairns in 1974, and I came up here to work with the Mapoon Aboriginal people and help them to move back to their land. And I believe you interviewed me regarding my first memoir with regard to that. This book actually talks about the work that the North Queensland Land Council that I was helped found, the work we did with the Arakoon and Mornington Island people when the Queensland government wanted to take over from that. Then later on, I was CEO of the Aboriginal Coordinating Council, and basically we were the head body for all of the Aboriginal local government communities in Queensland. So it was an advisory body to state and federal government. So I've had a lot of involvement.
Barbara, your books too, and you mentioned Mapoon. That might be the last time we spoke, but you've also written on historic figures over the generations now, and Aboriginal people have made amazing contributions to Australia.
Well, they have, and one of those has been William Cooper, a strong Christian who in the 1930s spent a lot of time working for Indigenous rights and also leading a protest against Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, during the start of the Holocaust. So he features in a number of my books.
Now, we'll want to reflect on some history today, and I guess especially some history that you've been a part of, and you've been writing about those things, and as I said in the introduction, an insider view. But do want to certainly bring these sorts of stories into what it might mean for us here today in modern Australia. The idea that Aboriginal people in Australia are facing big challenges right now. And, people talk about paternalism, they talk about racism. In fact, racism, the discussion about that's been on the rise and for all sorts of reasons. But I wonder whether you've got some thoughts on where we're at right now, the challenges that Aboriginal people are thinking about right now today.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges really is Aboriginal deaths in custody. And we just heard this morning that a 43-year-old in Brisbane died in custody last Thursday. He's become the ninth since March this year. And there is 478 deaths in custody since the Royal Commission in 1990-91, of which I wrote a submission when I was at the Aboriginal Coordinating Council, and many of my recommendations went into the final report. The other thing is closing the gap. There's a huge difference in any socio-economic statistic you could mention between how Aboriginal people and Indigenous people generally are faring compared to the rest of the population, whether it's rates of incarceration, whether it's health, income, education, a whole range of areas, housing, etc.
Okay, and when we talk about all of those issues, and there are various times through the year when all sorts of reports come out, and the comparison report cards say on the closing the gap issues around Australia, and sometimes we hear good news. I'm wondering whether your perspective is that things are improving for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia, or are they getting worse? What are your thoughts here, Barbara?
Oh, look, there's no doubt that there's improvement. I've seen huge improvement over the years. There's still a long way to go. I believe that generally the Australian people and generally current governments have goodwill toward Aboriginal people, and we really, these days, we say First Nations. There is goodwill out there. I mean, in the year 2000, we had 1 million Australians walk over bridges in this nation for reconciliation. We've had the apology to the Stolen Generation in 2008 by Kevin Rudd and Brendan O'Neill, a bipartisan. So, Brendan Nelson. So, that was really a shift in this nation because there were people all around the nation just in tears or shouting, they say the Melbourne Cup that stops a nation. Well, certainly when that apology was made in 2008, it stopped the nation because the nation was watching and listening, and it was a real opportunity for First Nations people to feel that there was some understanding of the pain that they had gone through in the history of this nation.
Barbara, since Sorry Day, 2008, and lots of us will just remember the crowds of people who walked across the Harbour Bridge. It was a major celebration. Have things gotten better since then, or are they worse? Because some people will say, right now, reconciliation looks like it's on the back burner, and some things where we had made some forward movement seem to be regressing here. Any thoughts about that?
No, I definitely think that there's improvement. The problem with the closing the gap, when we look at those indicators, there's been very little improvement there. There has been recent moves to refresh those targets and to have more First Nations involvement in helping to get those targets met. I'm not confident, really, that we're going to make big inroads there. Some of those targets now are put off 10, 20 years before those targets would be met, so that we have parity or justice or equality of outcomes for First Nations people in Australia.
isn't it good to know that there are some measurable things in there? Because some things are not so measurable, like, how people feel, the sense of goodwill between First Nations peoples and non-Indigenous Australians. That idea there. But it's good to know that government is able to quantify the way that there is some levels of improvement, or they can identify where things might be disintegrating in different areas and give some attention to that. It is a good thing, isn't it, to quantify those things?
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm just wondering about, because it seems to me, and this might be only my perspective, and listeners might have their own perspective, and I'll invite listeners to participate, but somehow or other, since the arrival of Black Lives Matter in the United States, there seems to be a lot of some of those sentiments that have also arrived here on our Australian shores. I wonder if you've got any thoughts about that.
Okay, so with regard to the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, unfortunately, it's Marxist inspired in terms of the originators in the US. So I have great difficulty with that. However, when we have a look at the Australian scene, First Nations people in Australia, they just could not get any traction. They could not get headlines. They could not get interest or caring in these deaths in custody. And so one of the reasons that they latched on to the Black Lives Matter was to try to get some recognition in this nation of the incredible pain, the hurt that has been occurring. And we really need to have compassion as Christians for those deaths, for those families, for those communities, because there's been very little redress in that regard.
Well, interesting perspective there on Black Lives Matter. As you say, Barbara, Marxist inspired, but a wonderful way of being able to bring First Nations people in Australia into that, because inability to get traction, and that means levels of media exposure and political interest in the idea of deaths in custody. And so there are those in Australia, activists, who have latched on to Black Lives Matter, perhaps not even aware of the Marxist-inspired move that came from that movement in the United States.
I would say most definitely most of them aren't. There would be a few, I think, in Melbourne, for example, who are, but on the whole, no, they would not be aware of the Marxist inspiration behind the US Black Lives Matter. But look, I think when you have a look at it, I actually don't think they own Black Lives Matter. Black lives do matter. All lives do matter. Jewish lives matter. Lives of babies aborted matter. Lives of elderly and disabled when euthanasia is on the table, their lives matter. We saw the recent thing in Queensland. It was just incredibly disturbing on the Courier Mail on Saturday, of people dying alone and in pain because the palliative care in Queensland, there's not enough funding going into that. So look, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, and as Christians, we know that God talks about the sanctity of life in His Word. And Norman and I, my husband's an Aboriginal pastor, I'm a pastor. We celebrate 25 years of pioneering our church this year. We have an international ministry. We travel, and before COVID, travel a lot overseas ministering in other nations. And so we're very well aware of the international scene with the church and otherwise.
Barbara, I know that listeners will warm to the sentiments that you bring today, and I want to invite listeners. Let's open our talkback line on 1-800-316-316. You might like to have your say today. You might have a question. You might have a comment about our conversation. Our special guest is Barbara Miller. Barbara's new book is called Secrets and Lies, The Shocking Truth of Recent Australian Aboriginal History, a memoir. And lots to talk about, I can say. We're back with more in just a few moments. But just let me mention, if you'd like to participate too, either on 1-800-316-316, or you can respond to our Facebook question today. And the question I'm asking is, what role do you think the Christian Church has in the battles and disputes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?